Hey, welcome. We're about to jump on a super fast road trip through American history. We're going to tackle one really big question along the way. How in the world did a handful of little settlements on this massive continent grow into one of the most powerful and diverse nations on Earth? All right, let's get started.
I mean, really think about it. How do you build a country from scratch? You've got land, you've got an idea, and that's it. That's really the question we're digging into today.
So before we rewind all the way to the beginning, let's take a quick peek at where the story is today. The USA is home to over 300 million people, and what's amazing is just how diverse it is, a mix of people from literally all over the globe. The story of how this happened, well, that is the story of America.
Okay, so let's hit rewind. We're going way, way back to the very first chapter, a land of newcomers. This is all about what was happening long before anyone had even thought of a country called the United States. You've basically got three completely different worlds colliding here. For thousands and thousands of years, the only people on this land were Native Americans, whose ancestors came over from Asia. Then, in what's like a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things, two other groups show up. Europeans looking for a new start, and Africans who were brought here by force. The interaction between these three groups is the foundation for everything that comes next.
Let's zoom in on one of the most famous groups of early arrivals, the Pilgrims. Now, these folks weren't looking for gold or anything like that. They were looking for freedom. They sailed across the whole Atlantic Ocean on a tiny ship called the Mayflower because they had a major disagreement with the official Church of England, and they wanted to build a brand new society their way.
And that first year was brutal. I mean, they were nearly wiped out by the harsh winter. They only survived because local Native Americans helped them out, showing them how to actually grow crops in this new place. So they celebrated that first successful harvest together, a moment that Americans now remember every year as Thanksgiving.
Okay, let's fast forward about 150 years. Those small settlements, they've exploded into 13 pretty successful British colonies all along the East Coast. But the relationship with their home country, Great Britain, is getting, well, it's getting really tense. It's time for the Great Breakup.
So, how did it all go down? Well, it started with money, as a lot of fights do. Britain started hitting the colonists with heavy taxes, and the colonists were furious. They felt like, hey, we don't even have a say in your government. No way. Tensions just boiled over, most famously with the Boston Tea Party, where colonists snuck onto ships and dumped a ton of British tea right into the harbor. That led to a formal breakup letter, the Declaration of Independence, and then it was all-out war.
And this was the idea that lit the match. Thomas Jefferson wrote this, and back then, this was a totally revolutionary idea. It completely flipped the whole concept of government upside down. It said that people aren't just subjects of a king, they're individuals with rights that no one can take away. This idea was pure fuel for the fire. And the guy leading the charge was a farmer from Virginia named George Washington. Against all the odds, he led this kind of scrappy American army to victory against the most powerful military in the world, the British Empire. So when the war was finally won, it was a no-brainer who would be the nation's first president. But this new country was born with a huge, dark contradiction right at its core. It was a nation founded on the idea of freedom, but millions of its people were enslaved. This one issue would nearly tear the brand new nation apart in its bloodiest conflict ever.
You see, the country was basically two different worlds living under one flag. The North was all about industry, building factories, and its economy ran on free labor. The South, though, was completely different. Its economy was built on huge farms, especially cotton fields, which completely depended on the labor of enslaved people. You just can't have those two systems in one country for long. Something had to give.
And in 1861, it all exploded into the Civil War. It was just a horrible, brutal war. It was literally brother fighting brother. The death toll was just staggering. More Americans died in this war than in all other American wars combined. And it was all fought over the fundamental question of slavery. Right in the middle of all this death and destruction, President Abraham Lincoln gave a speech that totally redefined what the war was all about. He said they weren't just fighting to hold the country together, but to prove to the whole world that a nation of the people, by the people, for the people could actually survive.
So the North won the war, and slavery was finally abolished. But the American story was far from over. The next chapter was just wild. It was a time of explosive growth, huge waves of immigration, and a long, painful struggle to make that promise of freedom a reality for every single person.
Just look at this number, 27 million. That's how many immigrants poured into the U.S. in just 50 years.
They came mostly from Europe, flooding into the country's booming cities to work in the factories. This wasn't just a trickle, it was a human tsunami that completely reshaped the face of America.
And this was the promise that greeted so many of them. These words, carved onto the base of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, became a symbol of hope for millions of people. They were leaving behind poverty and persecution, all for a chance at a new beginning.
But, ending slavery didn't magically create equality. For Black Americans, the fight had really just begun. This timeline shows just how long and hard that road to civil rights was. It was a whole century of struggle, marked by the incredible bravery of everyday people like Rosa Parks and the powerful voice of leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which eventually led to new laws that began to tear down segregation.
So that all brings us up to today, to the modern era. How does this massive, complicated, diverse country of over 300 million people actually work? Like, who runs the show?
Well, the whole system is based on a pretty clever design that's meant to stop any one person or group from getting too powerful. You've got 3 branches: Congress makes the laws, the president carries out the laws, and the Supreme Court decides what the laws mean. The whole point is for them to always be checking and balancing each other out.
Now, most of the political debate you hear about is between 2 major parties, and this is a really simple way to look at their core ideas. At its heart, it's a big argument about what the government's job should be. Generally, Democrats think the government should play a bigger role in helping people, which requires more taxes. Republicans, on the other hand, tend to believe people should help themselves more, and that means a smaller government with lower taxes. This fundamental disagreement is what drives a ton of the arguments in American politics today.
So yeah, from a couple of small settlements to a global superpower, it has been a wild ride. The story of America has always been about newcomers, about big, powerful ideas, and about constant, passionate arguments over what kind of country it should be. And that leaves us with the biggest question of all. What's the next chapter going to look like?